The content of this video, as well as the thoughts, views, and opinions expressed herein, belong to the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the views of Brigham Young University or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
It's great to see you again. Thank you for being here. I know at this point it is really late in the day, 8:30 at night. You guys really are the best. Thank you for coming. My name is Dr. Matthew Gray, Professor of Ancient Scripture. Let's go ahead and get to it. So in this hour, we are going to pick up in our series of classes looking at the book of Revelation in its historical context. As I've mentioned, many of you may have been here last night. This was a series of topics that I've been wanting to do for a very long time. I've had a long-standing fascination with the book of Revelation, and I always thought it would be really fun to come together, do this at Education Week, look at it from this perspective. And because we're going to be studying the book of Revelation or the Apocalypse of John this year in Come Follow Me in our Sunday school curriculum, I thought this is the year. Let's go ahead and do it. So I went ahead and proposed it. I was thrilled when they agreed that I could do this. And with that, one of the things that I'm so excited about doing with this series on the book of Revelation is providing a perhaps different perspective on reading the book than what we are typically used to. That is not to say that other perspectives aren't valid or aren't interesting or aren't inspiring. I will let everyone judge for themselves which of those categories different perspectives fall into. But the reality is we have a lot of different ways we could read this book of Revelation. We talked last time about how this book is so bizarre in all of its wild symbolism and all of its messaging that naturally in our modern days, man, it can mean just about anything. We often look at this book as if it's a prophetic blueprint for some future global political crisis that's right around the corner. And, this book can be used to clobber your political enemies. Whoever you don't like is the beast or the Antichrist. And it can be used for all sorts of kind of last days anxiety. I mean, all sorts of things that this book can do. None of those things are going to be the approaches that I'm going to take here. Again, I've got lots of different colleagues who take different approaches to the book of Revelation, and that's wonderful. Definitely listen to what they have to say. The approach that I am going to take, though, is not an approach that focuses on how the book of Revelation lays out a prophetic blueprint for the 21st century. Maybe it does. The reality is, I don't know. As I said last week, I am not much of a prophet. I am a little bit of a historian, though. And so from my perspective, I think a fascinating and enriching way to read the book of Revelation is not by trying to force it into our political anxieties going forward, but to take a step and look backwards to ask the question of what did this book mean to its original audience? Okay, chances are pretty good that people who originally read this book would never have even guessed in a million years that people would be in a place called America in the 21st century worried about global currencies and vaccines and whatever political, my guess is that's not even on their radar at all. The reality is the original audience of the book of Revelation, early Jesus followers living in the Roman Empire, specifically in cities of Asia Minor, a part of Western Turkey, who are dealing with their own anxieties, their own concerns, their own persecutions, their own social marginalizations, their own worries and anxieties. That's the group that this book was originally written to and originally addressed to. So as a historian, someone who's always wired to ask about historical context first, that's actually the approach that I want to take here. And frankly, I'm thrilled to see you here. I was worried that last time when I said that I'm not going to give you all the mysteries of the last days, I just assumed that maybe 4 of you would come back. I'm just joking. I'm really glad to hear that and see that you're back to look at this historically contextualized approach. So with that question in mind of historical context, I've called this series the historical context of the apocalypse, which that was a little clever, but focusing on reading the book of Revelation in the first century. What did it mean to its original audience? And I do believe, again, you can have different perspectives on the book. That's really great. But inevitably, understanding its original setting and significance must be step one, I think, in a responsible reading of the book. Okay, so that's the goal of this series. So to work towards that goal, last class period, we tried to set the stage. We tried to present some background by looking at two things that I hope were helpful. Number one, understanding, actually three things we did last time. We looked at all the different possible interpretive models of the book. There's not one way to interpret this book. Over the centuries, there have been many different ways that we looked at last time. But number two, we looked at the genre of this book. Last time we discussed how understanding how ancient Jewish apocalyptic literature works as a genre, as a style of writing of which the book of Revelation is not the only kind, is a really, really helpful step toward grappling with the book in our own day. And then finally, last time, we looked at some basic historical context, some basic historical setting of the book. What I want to do starting tonight is we want to start reading the book in that historical context, beginning with the first three chapters, basically, Revelation 1 through 3. Tomorrow, we'll look at Revelation 4 through 11. And on Friday, we'll finish by looking at Revelation 12 through 22. Now, the way that we're going to do this reading through the text together is we're going to notice a couple things. That to understand the way this book was heard by its original first century Jewish Christian, maybe Gentile Christian audience, we're going to notice two different things. Okay, number one, they're not looking to the 21st century. That's not even on their radar. What's on their radar really are two things. Number one, the ways in which the book of Revelation, in all of its wild and bizarre imagery, is so deeply connected with the writings of the Old Testament. That's something that's going to be very striking to a first century Christian reader of this book. Image after image, animal after beast, after number after color. The wide array of symbols in this book are going to point their minds towards the writings of Daniel, the writings of Ezekiel, the writings of Zechariah. Okay, so in the next three class periods, we are going to be looking a lot at intertextuality, the ways in which the book of Revelation draws heavily upon Old Testament scripture, something that would have been much more striking to a first century reader of the book than it often is to us today. We often totally miss those references altogether unless we might have a really good study Bible. The other thing that we want to focus on in this series of classes is understanding its significance. How did these images convey messages to this first century audience in their Roman world, right? What did it look like to read this book in the Roman cities of Ephesus, Smyrna, Sardis, Pergamum, and the other churches? And how did this provide a message of hope for those Christians in their particular time and place and social circumstance? So that's going to be what we're going to focus on in this class. Again, I hope you enjoy this historical approach. I think it's a lot of fun and very enriching. We'll see if you agree by the end. Okay, so to begin tonight, I do want to just present, I think, 2 or maybe 3 slides, a very quick review of some of the historical background issues that we mentioned last time, just to make sure we're all on the same page in case you're just now joining us. So what is the historical setting of the book of Revelation? Well, number one, the date. Scholars actually we don't know for sure. Okay, some scholars believe the book of Revelation could have been written as early as the 60s AD, and some suggest that it could have been written as late as the 90s AD. Point is, definitely late mid to late first century. The author identifies himself as John the Seer or John the Revelator. He tells us he's writing this book from a small island called Patmos, right off the coast of Asia Minor on the coast of Western Turkey today. And we know for sure, because the book opens by addressing its original audience, that this book was originally written to Jesus followers in the Roman cities of Asia Minor, 7 churches in Asia Minor in particular. And it actually names those original audience members. We mentioned last time that if you look at a map of first century Asia Minor and you pinpoint in green, I believe that you can see the green circles there, the 7 different cities in Asia Minor that all have house churches of these Christian minority groups, right, who are struggling in their social environments. You'll notice one thing, that those churches all cluster together on the western coast of Turkey, and you'll notice that they're all right on the Roman road network. In other words, this is a letter that is meant to circulate in the region of Asia Minor. So as John writes it on the island of Patmos, you can see that on the map off to your left, he sends it with somebody, a fellow laborer of some kind, and it first probably goes with the ship that disembarks in Ephesus. And then it goes on to Smyrna and Sardis and Thyatira and Pergamum. They're just literally taking the letter on the road network and reading it out loud to the different house churches to whom this letter was addressed. Two more quick slides by way of review, and then we'll jump into new material. The second to last thing I want to mention is, so based on the letter itself, what seems to have been the social circumstance that prompted this person, John the Revelator, to write this book? Well, he actually is pretty clear about that. We don't need to do a lot of guesswork here. What seems to be happening is that he is writing to a community of believers in Asia Minor who are experiencing, number one, some kind of local persecution. Some kind of local Roman authority persecution is causing some suffering among this religious and cultural minority group. This group also seems to be experiencing some social marginalization. They probably became Christians at a pretty high social cost, having left families, having left traditional religious systems behind, having turned their back on their civic duty to participate in the civic religious life of these Greco-Roman cities. Some of that social marginalization may even have come from the Jewish synagogue communities that they eventually left to become a Jesus follower. We also can tell from the writings of the book that the author is concerned that some members of these house churches in these cities are feeling the pressures to reintegrate into Roman religious systems, such as emperor worship. Something that Asia Minor is known for in the first century is being one of the leading regions, or I should say one of the regions of the Roman Empire that's leading out in emperor worship, literally creating emperor cults, cults to the living Roman emperor, to which you would go to their shrine, offer sacrifices at certain festivals, and by doing so, be showing your loyalty to the living emperor. Cities in Asia Minor, these cities in particular, were doing that. And it seems that some local Christians were being pressured to reintegrate into that system to show their loyalty as good citizens of Ephesus, Sardis, and so forth. And this author obviously is very concerned about that. And then finally, it seems that some in this community are starting to give in to those social pressures, maybe accommodating Roman lifestyles in a way, or maybe reverting back to Roman lifestyles that the author feels are incompatible with Christian living. So in short, this author is writing to address those specific circumstances in first century Asia Minor. And the message of this author is actually itself also quite clear. This author seems to believe that the Roman Empire is Babylon, the prostitute on the 7 hills, the prostitute that rides the dragon. Right? We'll see some of those images in the next couple days. And so as Babylon, this author is encouraging the followers of Jesus in this region to avoid Babylon, to faithfully endure their persecutions and their social marginalizations, to be separate from this beast of a kingdom called Rome, and await the coming of God's kingdom. And in the process of delivering this message, the author seems to be offering very clear prophetic critiques of Roman society, Roman conquest, Roman violence, Roman economy, Roman hubris, and Roman blasphemy. And we're going to see all of those themes play out in this fascinating array of symbols and images that this apocalyptic writer shares in this book. We'll unpack this in the next couple days. So with that very quick review in mind of time, place, circumstance, and message, let's turn to the actual book. So how does this apocalyptic writer, writing within the genre of Jewish apocalypticism, a genre that we discussed in detail last time, how does this author convey that message to these first century Christians? Well, he does so in the following way. This is basically how the book is organized. It starts off with a very short introduction. We will read that in its entirety in a moment. And then the chapter that what we call chapter 1 mostly focuses now on the opening vision of the book, where we see Jesus as the Son of Man walking in what seems to be the heavenly temple. Then chapters 2 and 3 focus specifically on those 7 churches of Asia Minor, literally addressing them city by city, name by name, and talking about specific circumstances. That's what we're going to cover tonight. Tomorrow, we're going to cover chapters 4 through 11, where we get the vision of the heavenly throne room and this scroll with 7 seals on it. And each seal, of course, has some fascinating symbolic significance. And then on Friday, we will look at how the book concludes with the culmination of this heavenly warfare and the ultimate victory and the ultimate triumph of God through a new heaven, a new earth, and a new creation. Okay, so with all that, how would this have sounded in the first century? Let's go ahead and read it together, trying to look at it through their perspective. Okay, let's look at the introduction first. Very short, 11 verses. We can read most of this together. Let's look at chapter 1 together. Okay, I love how the book begins. I love how the book opens by saying this: the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show to his servants what must soon take place. He made it known by sending his angel to his servant John. Now that's verse 1. There is some really interesting stuff to unpack there. Okay. The first thing is, the very first word in the book is apocalypsis. Okay. The Greek word for apocalypse or revelation. We mentioned last time that we often talk to each other as if apocalyptic writings like this are encoded in bizarre symbolism. Like it's the symbolism is meant to conceal the message from you. Okay. Actually, the word means just the opposite. An apocalypse is a revelation of meaning to you. It's a pulling the curtain back and letting you see stuff that had been hidden, but now is being made known. And the way that this author proceeds is that this book is an apocalypse, a revelation, an unveiling of Jesus Christ. That is so interesting, okay? Because number one, it reminds us that this book, its primary stated purpose is not about some of the things we often make it about. It's actually meant to reveal Jesus to you in some significant way. So at the very least, one thing that I would hope we would do as modern readers is try to cut through some of the fog of all the wild kind of left behind stuff that is fun to watch. I love the Kirk Cameron movies, no question. The Nicolas Cage movie is terrible. But anyway, but kind of cut through all that fog and just ask yourself, when I read this book, is it revealing Jesus to me? Okay, what about Jesus is being revealed here? That's the stated opening purpose of the book. But the fascinating thing about the Greek here is the fact that, look at this genitive, right? The apocalypse is Jesu Christou, which means the apocalypse of Jesus, but the genitive there in Greek could actually mean you can have a couple options of how to actually translate that. Is this a revelation that was given to Jesus? That's one way you could read this. Is it a revelation given by Jesus? Like, in other words, did God give Jesus this revelation? Did Jesus give John the revelation? Was it a revelation by Jesus? Or is it a revelation about Jesus? All three of those are perfectly legitimate translation options for the genitive of the apocalypsis Jesu Christou. Okay, I think as we're looking at those options, one other possibility is the answer is yes. It could actually be a combination of these. A revelation to Jesus, by Jesus, about Jesus. That's how the book begins, opening some really interesting possibilities of interpretation. But it's a revelation of Jesus Christ, which then God gave to him, presumably Jesus, to show to his servants what must soon take place. That first servant is going to be John. Okay, so that's how the book begins in verse 1. But then the rest of the introduction literally gets right to work in that process of revealing Jesus to us, starting with a whole series of divine titles that, again, aren't focused on last day cataclysms. They're focused on who is Jesus. John, to the 7 churches in Asia Minor, grace be to you and peace. It's written as a letter. From him who is, who was, and who is to come. That's the first divine title that this author reveals about Jesus. He is the past, the present, and the future. What seems to be some kind of interpretive play on maybe even the word Yahweh, the name of God in Hebrew, which itself is the to be verb in a conglomeration of its past, present, and future iterations, right? This is a really high Christology here. From him who is, who was, and who is to come, the past, the present, and the future. Jesus Christ, the faithful witness, or in Greek, the faithful martyr. The firstborn of the dead, the ruler of the kings of this earth. One of the messages of apocalyptic literature is that kingdoms of this earth might seem like they have all the power, but they don't. Okay, they're just actually agents of the devil. The real power is in God's kingdom, and Christ is the king of that kingdom. He has the ruler. He has a power over the rulers of this earth. It goes on to say, let's go down to verse 8. He's coming with the clouds. Verse 8. I am the Alpha and the Omega, beginning and the end, says the Lord God, again, who is, who was, who is to come, the Pantocrator in Greek, the Almighty, the all-powerful one, asserting Jesus's omnipotence as the Pantocrator, the all-powerful, right at the very beginning. So I think that, again, in a little bit of the fog of, okay, well, when do we get to last day stuff? Settle in. It's going to be a while. That's not how the book begins. Okay, this is all about the revelation of Jesus Christ, starting with asserting his omnipotence, his divinity, his power, and some of these really great divine titles. Now, the other thing that this introduction does that would have spoken to a first century audience is it not only shows who Jesus is, but it shows what he does for his community, a community that might be suffering in the Roman Empire. Okay, and that's going to be in the middle of this section. Let's follow the red down to verses 5 and 6. So not only do we give these divine titles, but now we say about Jesus, Jesus loves us, his followers in Asia Minor. He freed us from our sins by his blood, and he made us a kingdom of priests serving God, his Father. That phrase right there is so interesting that if you have a text, I hope you'd circle it, because that is going to be a major theme of this book, that Jesus's work of redemption to his suffering, marginalized, persecuted people is ultimately to make them kings and priests unto God. And if you're wondering, yes, that's exactly where Joseph Smith gets that language. Okay, he's reading the book of Revelation. Statement number 1, Jesus makes us kings and priests unto God. Well, where's the book of Revelation getting that language? The author's not pulling it out of thin air. First century audiences, at least from a Jewish perspective, would have recognized that phraseology as coming from the Sinai narrative of Exodus 19. That was the original Sinai covenant. Exodus 19, Israelites are gathered at the base of Mount Sinai, and God says, I want to make a covenant relationship with you, my holy set-apart people. And part of that covenant set-apartedness is I am going to make you, depending on how you translate it, either kings and priests unto God, a kingdom of priests unto God, a royal priesthood unto God. Actually, a couple ways you could translate it. I believe King James settled on kings and priests unto God, at least in Revelation 1. But that's what that language comes from. It's the original Sinai covenant. And what the author of the book of Revelation is promising his audience is that that's what God's work is all about. That covenant promise is not only in force, but we're going to renew it here through your faithfulness, through your discipleship. So a lot of cool Old Testament intertextuality in play, literally right from the first 11 verses. Let's keep our eye on that theme of kings and priests, because we're going to notice that this will continue to play out in the book. And this, by the way, reminds us of something that I mentioned yesterday very briefly. We were talking about different interpretive possibilities, ways we could approach the book of Revelation. And naturally it comes up, well, how did Joseph Smith read this book? By the end of his life, Joseph Smith read the book of Revelation not for its prophetic prowess in kind of showing us how global crises were going to unfold. In Nauvoo, by the time of Joseph's final years, he was mining the book of Revelation for temple language, mining the book for images, vocabulary, verbiage that he could integrate into the endowment that he was unfolding in 1842, 1843, 1844. So all of those Nauvoo period sermons, when it turns to Revelation, it's all this cool temple stuff. So if as we go through this, you start to see, oh, that sounds pretty familiar from a Mormon endowment perspective, that's not a coincidence. Joseph's reading this book really carefully and says, how do I get that stuff onto the heads of the Latter-day Saints through this temple experience? There's a very direct relationship between the temple, the book of Revelation, and Joseph Smith's interest in renewing the Sinai experience now for Latter-day Saints. John the Revelator is interested in renewing that Sinai experience for his first century audience. So a lot of interconnectedness there. Okay, well, we're not done with the introduction yet. How does the introduction conclude? Well, after outlining these powerful divine titles for Jesus, recalling the Sinai experience that this author wants to refresh, the introduction concludes, I, John, your brother, I share with you in these persecutions. I also feel the social marginalization. I'm not above it. I'm with you in the suffering. And I'm on the island of Patmos because of it. And I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I had an experience. I saw some stuff. Right? I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet saying, write in a book what you see and send it to, and here we get our stated first century audience. We don't have to guess, to Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. Thus establishing the audience that we are interested in for this historical context approach. Okay, so with that, that's a very short but highly, densely packed introduction to the book. And now we move on to its opening vision. So, okay, get ready, buckle up. As it turns out, still not interested in cataclysmic end times events. It's still on the theme of revealing Jesus to us. The opening vision of the book is a revelation of Jesus in the heavenly temple. Let's take a look. Here's how it reads. This is chapter 1, still verses 12 through 20. So John says, I then turned to see whose voice was speaking to me. I hear this voice coming from the sky. And upon turning, I'm looking up at the sky and I see 7 golden lampstands. And in the midst of those 7 golden lampstands, I saw someone walking around among them. And the closer I looked, he looked just like the Son of Man figure that Daniel 7 talked about coming on the clouds. Remember Daniel 7, the biblical apocalypse, the Son of Man on the clouds coming to destroy the beasts of this world and save the saints? Man, the guy that I'm looking at, walking among the 7 candlesticks, he looks just like the way Daniel described the Son of Man. And then he looks closer. He's like, yeah, he has a long robe on. He's got a golden sash that he's wearing as part of this long robe. His head and his hair were like white like wool, white like snow. His eyes were on fire. And he goes on to describe when he spoke, it's just like rushing waters at a waterfall. In his right hand, he held 7 stars, and from his mouth came a sharp 2-edged sword, and his face was shining like the sun in full force. Right off the bat, we are in an apocalyptic mode, meaning a symbolic style of writing that is very closely connected with the Old Testament and that uses a wide variety of fascinating images, symbols that need to be unpacked. Okay, so let's see how the vision concludes. When I saw this, shining like the sun in full force, wearing the robe and the sash, walking around among the 7 candlesticks of gold, I fell at his feet as though I were dead. But he reached out, put his right hand upon me and says, "Don't be afraid. I'm the Alpha and the Omega. I'm the first and the last. I'm the living one." I love this. "I was dead, but see, I am now alive forever and ever. I have the keys of death and hell." Talk about a revelation of Jesus. What a cool statement. I was dead, but now I live. And I've got these keys of death and Hades. Now write what you have seen, what is and what is to shortly take place. Right, the mystery of the 7 stars that you saw in my right hand, the 7 golden lampstands, well, those are all the angels of the 7 churches that you're writing to, and the 7 golden lampstands are, in fact, the churches themselves. All right, so let's take a pause and just unpack a little bit. So powerful vision, clearly in the spirit of revealing Jesus to us, right, in a way that promotes hope and trust in his omnipotence, right? What would you have seen as a first century reader? Well, you would have seen a couple things. Number one, the connection to Daniel 7 is crystal clear. I mean, he's literally quoting from Daniel 7 in this vision. So message number one of this opening experience is Jesus is the Son of Man figure from Daniel 7. The Son of Man associated with the Ancient of Days, coming on the clouds in judgment, wiping out the bad guys, destroying the beasts, saving the righteous. But more than that, the setting of the Son of Man in heaven is fascinating. All of the images that are in play in that first vision sound a lot like ancient Jerusalem temple images. 7 golden candlesticks? What does that sound a lot like? The golden menorah with its 7 branches in the Jerusalem temple. The white robes and the sash, that sounds a lot like how priests were dressed in the temple. Okay, most people, contrary to the art that we often see, some beautiful art we often see, most people did not wear white robes. Okay, that is not something Jesus would have worn. Robes and sashes were things worn by priests in the temple. Well, Jesus as Son of Man is walking around among the 7 golden candlesticks, almost it's like it's the menorah of the heavenly temple, and he's dressed like he's a priest in the heavenly temple. What do priests do? Well, they mediate between Israel and God, between humans and deity. Jesus is that. That's revealing Jesus to you. He's got all power. He's the Son of Man. And he's the heavenly high priest making intercession. For who? Well, it's the 7 lampstands. It's the 7 churches. He is in your midst right now doing his intercessive work as we speak. He's with you as priest, as Son of Man. And that's the opening vision. Man, pretty cool. Once we clear away the fog and just let the text speak in its context, like, man, this is really some great stuff. There's some stuff that we can really think about here. Okay, so that's the opening vision. Well, what happens next? Well, after that opening vision, we then shift into full-on letter writing mode. We've already noted from chapter 1, verse 1 and 2 and 3, that this is clearly presented as a circular letter, right? He literally has the epistolary grace be unto you, peace be unto you, just exactly how Paul starts his letters, with the idea that this would circulate them in Asia Minor, right? So it's a letter, but now he turns his letter writing to specific messages pointed to the individual house churches that are in these 7 cities in first century Asia Minor. So let's look at chapters 2 and 3 together. Now, before we look at the messages given to these specific 7 churches, let me give you kind of an overview perspective. The overview is he goes one by one. In fact, by the end, you might feel it's a little bit redundant because it's a little bit formulaic, because for each church he addresses one by one, he recounts their struggles. Sometimes he'll call them out. He'll point out things in which he feels they're being a little too loose on. They're kind of compromising their Christian discipleship in favor of Roman ways or whatever. Okay, so he'll call some of that out one by one. Say, I know you guys are struggling with this, but he'll also call out their triumphs. But man, you've been successful at that. That's the ideal. That's the aspirational ideal. And as he does, church by church, city by city in Asia Minor, after he recounts their triumphs and their struggles, he then pronounces a series of promised blessings upon each community if they overcome in faith and discipleship. Blessed are you if you overcome, and then he pronounces these blessings. The blessings are beautiful, they're very symbolic, and they all have two things in common. They all are symbols drawn from the ritual world of the Jerusalem temple. Remember, the Jerusalem temple was meant to encapsulate the Sinai experience for ancient Israel. Well, we read in chapter 1 that this author wants to refresh the Sinai experience. So it's almost like he's taking these Jerusalem temple images and say, if you endure in faithful discipleship, despite the persecutions and the social marginalizations, these kind of temple images will be placed on your head. That's kind of cool. And as part of that, he uses these images to reinforce the idea that if you overcome in faithful discipleship, the promises of kingship and priesthood, the blessings of becoming kings and priests that were pronounced on Israel at Mount Sinai will be yours. So as we go through these, we will point out kind of the temple-based images that would have resonated to a first century audience, and languages of kingship or images of kingship and priesthood pronounced upon the faithful who overcome. So that's the overall picture of these letters to the seven churches, chapters 2 and 3. Let's go through the seven churches one by one. And again, I recognize this might feel a little tedious, but for each one, I at least want to show you where the church is. I can't help myself. I have to show a little bit of archaeology, and then we'll look at the message. Okay, starting with Ephesus. So if you look at the map on the right-hand part of the screen, you'll notice that Ephesus is the first church listed in this circular letter. That makes sense because that's probably the port city that the letter bearer disembarked to, right? So in other words, he's going from Patmos with the letter, probably disembarks at the large port at Ephesus, and off we go to church number 1, which is the church of Ephesus. Today, of course, Ephesus is known for its remarkable Roman ruins, some of which were there in the time of Jesus, some of which were not. But today you can, based on the archaeological excavations of Ephesus, do a basic artistic reconstruction of what this massive Greek port city would have looked like with its theater. Paul spent 2 years in Ephesus during his, what we sometimes call, third mission. So house churches have been developing in Ephesus as a religious minority group for a very long time. Right, here's another angle of the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, one of the amazing features of the ancient Mediterranean world. Artemis was the patron deity of Ephesus, right? And again, here are some of the surviving remains that some of you may have actually seen. But let's actually turn to Revelation chapter 2. Well, what does he say about the Ephesians? Well, the first thing he says is, number one, he praises their efforts in discipleship. You have had encounters, John says, with false apostles, and you've rejected those false apostles. Sadly, the author never tells us, well, who are those guys? And what were they preaching? What made them false apostles? The author never tells us. He assumes that the Ephesians know what he's talking about. Some kind of Christian teachers who are coming into Ephesus claiming authority of some kind, but clearly teaching a version of Christianity that the author doesn't agree with. Hence, false apostles, right? And you guys encountered those people and you rejected them. That's really great. I know that you've been laboring for Jesus. Way to go. That's fantastic. And I also know that you rejected the teachings of some group that he calls the Nicolaitans. Who are they? Answer is, have no clue, actually. We really just don't know who these people are. Some group that was obviously active in Ephesus that was doing or teaching something that the author disagreed with. He's praising the Ephesians for rejecting them. However, he says, I do notice that some of you are, quote unquote, leaving your first love. What does that mean? He doesn't actually say. Something about what the Ephesians are doing, the author considers as you're backsliding a little bit. You're somehow compromising your initial commitment to the Christian walk. And that's where he leaves it. So then after that brief survey of the struggles and triumphs of this community, the author says to the Ephesians, let me pronounce blessings upon you if you endure in faithfulness. Here's how he says this. Let anyone who has an ear to hear listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches. That is an interesting phrase that this author will repeat upon all the seven churches with all the blessings. It's almost like there's some kind of, it does sound a little esoteric. It sounds a little secretive, like, hey, if you got ears to hear, you're going to really know what I'm talking about. I don't think we need to dig that deep. It actually kind of is clear what he's talking about, but it's like you guys are going to have specially attuned ears to hear this. So if you have ears to hear, listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches. To everyone who conquers, meaning who overcomes in their Christian discipleship, I will give permission to eat from the tree of life that is in the paradise of God. So blessing or promise number one is a concept that resonates with Jerusalem temple imagery. It's the tree of God, the tree of life that was in the Edenic paradise of Genesis 1-3. How does that relate to the temple? Well, as you probably know, in ancient Israelite temple tradition, with the tabernacle, Solomon's temple, Herod's temple, Edenic paradise imagery was a huge part of the temple iconography and the temple furnishings, because conceptually, the temple in ancient Israel was designed to somehow allow Israelites or Jews to return back to the presence of God, the Edenic state from which Adam and Eve were cast out in Genesis 2 and 3. So, for example, the menorah in the Jerusalem temple was often described as a representation of the tree of life. So with this, from the Garden of Eden. So what this author seems to be saying is, for those of you who overcome in faithful discipleship, you'll be able to re-access the presence of God as symbolized by the tree of life. It's almost like you're going into that conceptual temple space, just like the Son of Man was in chapter 1, right, tending the golden lampstand. So that's Ephesus. Let's go to Smyrna, the second city of the seven. This is chapter 2, verses 8-11. And you'll notice, by the way, this is the next stop on the Roman road. Smyrna is also a Greco-Roman port city. It just happens to be the next one down from Ephesus. And it also has some pretty remarkable archaeological remains. So definitely go check it out if you get a chance. Here's how we might artistically reconstruct first century Smyrna based on the surviving archaeological remains, a bustling downtown. You can see a really cool port for shipping and trade and travel. And you can see a lot of homes for house churches and so forth and other features. So that's Smyrna. What does the author say to those house churches in Smyrna? Well, he recounts their experiences of tribulation. They are apparently suffering. Again, social marginalization, perhaps, something that they're experiencing pain. They are experiencing some poverty. So there's some impoverishment among this community. And apparently some of them are being imprisoned for their faith. Maybe they're not contributing to the civic religious expectations. That's very possible, that kind of thing. He also describes how this particular community of house churches is experiencing tensions with the quote-unquote synagogue of Satan. Wow, tell us how you really feel, right? Clearly, there's some kind of Jewish congregation in Smyrna that this author feels is doing actually the work of Satan. Obviously, this is some very anti-Jewish rhetoric, at least localized Jewish rhetoric, in the sense that this local synagogue was somehow marginalizing or ostracizing Jesus followers. And this author said, I know that you have suffered at the hands of this synagogue of Satan. Probably shouldn't read too much into that. It's some heated rhetoric of the moment. And he actually concludes to say, yeah, those who say they're Jews, but they're not really Jews. Wow, this guy's got some feelings about this synagogue congregation, whatever they were doing. And they were somehow contributing to the tribulations of Jesus followers in the Roman city of Smyrna. Well, after recounting their experiences of tribulation and imprisonment and poverty, the author then goes on to say, well, now let me pronounce blessings upon your head, you believers in Smyrna. Be faithful unto death. And if you do, I will give you the crown of life. Let anyone that has an ear to hear listen to what the Spirit, again, that kind of esoteric message. You know what I'm saying. Whoever conquers in discipleship through their tribulations will not be harmed by the second death. So it's some kind of crown of life that will symbolize the overcoming of death and the overcoming of mortal pain. What kind of crown is he thinking about? Well, if you're a first century author, first century audience, you might think of a couple different types of crowns, all of which may apply. One crown is, of course, the victory laurel wreath, the victory wreath that would crown emperors or crown victorious athletes. We have lots of statuary of Roman emperors wearing victory crowns, athletes wearing victory crowns, and so forth. Very possible. In a Jewish context, so if you're like a Gentile member in Smyrna and you're hearing crown, you might be thinking of those images. If you're a Jewish believer in Smyrna and you are hearing the word crown actually is the exact same word that the book of Exodus uses for the high priest's headplate. Right? Remember, the high priest who wore his priestly garments in the Jerusalem temple, the robe, the sash, the other items, also had an additional headpiece called the crown. Right? And it was on that crown there was a golden plate that had Kodesh LaAdonai, the holiness to the Lord, written on it. Which crown is the author referring to? We don't know, but that's the cultural orbit of this house church, right? It's something along these lines, whether they be a Jewish temple crown or a Roman victories crown. By the way, both images work really well for this theme that we're developing of becoming kings and priests unto God. The crown of kingship, the crown of high priesthood, perhaps. Okay, very consistent with the patterns that we're seeing in this text. Now, internet art, obviously, for the Book of Revelation is a fascinating and sometimes limited experience. But as I'm, searching Crown of Life, Book of Revelation, I actually did come across one that I think is kind of cool. A little cheesy, but it's okay. This is a great. This is a cool artistic depiction of exactly what this author is trying to convey. If you overcome in discipleship, there's Jesus, his priestly robes with his golden sash and his own crown, so his own kingship and priesthood. He's the king and priest in the heavenly temple that we saw from chapter 1. And what was he doing? Well, he's crowning the faithful believers who endured in discipleship. They have their robes, their sashes, and their crowns. They're being made kings and priests unto God. And I just love the fact that we see Jesus smiling as he's doing this. This is fun. We sometimes get a little too reverent, perhaps, in the way we solemnly depict Jesus. He's finding joy in making this believer a king and a priest unto God, just like the book of Revelation says. So anyway, you're kind of getting the idea. Let's go on to the next one. Trying to keep an eye on the clock, so I'm trying to pace us. But I think you're getting the point. I just wanted you to note these blessings. They're pretty cool and what they would have signified in the first century. Well, the next one is going to be Pergamon. Pergamon is not a port town. It's further inland, but it's still on the Roman road network. And as you're moving your way up to Pergamon, you will see some really cool ruins again that allow us to artistically reconstruct what this quite vast city would have looked like, with a really cool Acropolis and downtown and kind of elongated residential space. Well, what's going on in Pergamon? Well, Pergamon is a fascinating city that if it's in a region that is developing forms of emperor worship, Pergamon is one of the leading cities in this form of religious expression and sense of civic duty to worship the living emperor. In fact, Pergamon is known for having the Great Altar. It's this massive thing that today you have to go to the Berlin Archaeological Museum because the Germans ripped it off and brought it to Germany. But if you go to Berlin, today you can see the altar that was dismantled and reassembled in Berlin that was originally from Pergamon. It is the Great Altar that seems to be originally dedicated to Zeus, but by the end of the first century had also become used as the altar to venerate the Roman Emperor Domitian. So this altar, this great altar, is kind of combining Zeus and Domitian together as a form of emperor worship, the Pax Deorum, right? The venerating the patron deity, the great Zeus. The relief art is really, really remarkable. This is probably what the author refers to as the seat of Satan, right? So if you are reading this book and you're like, oh, the seat of Satan, what does that look like? Almost certainly it's this altar, which is artistically reconstructed here. In beautiful color, by the way. We're used to seeing all the marble just without color, but this was all originally painted. Scholars can check out the pigment and reconstruct the coloring of these things. Anyway, that's the altar. So Pergamon, then what does the author say? Well, the author says that you guys have it really tough, you believers in Pergamon, because the presence of Satan's seat is there. Almost certainly a direct reference to the great altar of Zeus and the Emperor Domitian. Now, among Pergamon, someone had died, a guy named Antipas, the faithful martyr. However, it does seem, as hard as you guys have it, you're giving in. You seem to be accepting the teachings of these Nicolaitans, whoever they might be. You also seem to be accepting the quote-unquote doctrine of Balaam. What does that mean? Probably associations of fornication, prostitutes, probably food of idols. We'll talk about that in the 1 Corinthians thing next time. And so in other words, they're doing things in ways of Roman living that the author feels are not conducive to the Christian walk. So therefore, Pergamon, got to shape up a little bit there. Here are some blessings to remind you to get back on the track of discipleship. Let those who have an ear to hear, let them hear what the Spirit has to say to you. Anyone who conquers in discipleship, I will give to you hidden manna, hidden bread that is secreted away. And I will give you a white stone. And on the white stone will be written a new name that no one will know except the one that receives it. Again, is Joseph Smith reading the book of Revelation? Absolutely. Definitely mining this thing for verbiage that we can apply to the Latter-day Saints today. But in a first century context, what would this have sounded like? What do you mean, hidden manna? We'll be able to eat of secreted bread? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by a stone that's inscribed with a name? What is all that stuff? Well, all of that stuff from a first century context very closely relates to the Jerusalem temple. Again, it's a consistent pattern. Let's start with the hidden manna. What's the hidden manna? Well, the hidden manna is literally the table of showbread. in the Jerusalem temple, where manna is, or the bread, kind of representing that bread of life in the book of Exodus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, that's literally secreted in the Jerusalem temple that only the priests can access in that sacred set-apart space. Well, if you guys overcome, you'll be able to eat the bread from the table of showbread, because you'll be priests in the temple, kings and priests. Well, what about the inscribed stone? Well, inscribed stones have resonance in early Judaism because the high priest had a breastplate that had inscribed stones, right? Precious gems, all of which were engraved with the names of the tribes of Israel. And the tradition was, definitely by the late Second Temple period, that those engraved stones on the breastplate of the high priest had oracular powers. There was even traditions by the late Second Temple period that when God wanted to communicate to the high priest, various letters on the inscribed names on the stones would actually start illuminating, and the pattern of illuminated letters from the inscribed stones would convey oracular messages to the Jerusalem high priest. So what seems to be the message here to Pergamon? If you guys overcome in faithful discipleship, you, like priests in the Jerusalem temple, will be able to access the hidden manna, be able to eat from the table of showbread. You, like priests, like the high priests in the Jerusalem temple, will have your own inscribed stones. In this case, your inscribed stone will have your new name on it. Well, anyway, you're starting to get the picture. Some really cool patterns of Jerusalem temple iconography, conceptual ideas, and themes of kingship and priesthood. Well, let's go to Thyatira, chapter 2, verses 18 through 29. By far the least interesting archaeologically, not a lot there. That's pretty much what you see is what you get at Thyatira. But we do have the message of to Thyatira from the author of Revelation. Charity, service, and faith. Some good folks in Thyatira, really walking the walk. That's great. But some of you are embracing the teachings of Jezebel. Again, this author seems to be going back to Old Testament stories and characters to describe behaviors of the house church members in ways that obviously this writer, the author does not approve of some of these behaviors. So he's saying, yeah, you guys are following the doctrine of Balaam or the teachings of Jezebel, right? Again, probably suggesting you're hanging out with prostitutes and fornication. You're probably eating food that was dedicated to idols. This author thinks all of that stuff is way too accommodating with a Roman lifestyle for those who are set apart with the refreshed Sinai covenant of becoming kings and priests unto the God of Israel. But Thyatira, if you endure, here are the blessings that will be yours. Thyatira, chapter 2, verses 8 to 29. To everyone who overcomes and conquers and who does my work till the end, I will give authority over the nations, to rule them with an iron rod, as when clay pots are shattered, even as I received authority from my Father, because the author is channeling Jesus. As I received authority from my Father, to the one who conquers, I will also give the morning star. Then here we have that esoteric, anyone that has an ear to hear, let him hear what the Spirit is saying to the churches. So some really cool images again that in this case often have to do with kingship. We've seen a lot of priestly images in the previous blessings, but now we're going to get a lot of royal kingship blessings. Okay. For example, I will give authority to rule over the nations. That's a kingship role. In fact, you will be able to rule them with an iron rod. I know that in a Latter-day Saint context, we're often assuming that the iron rod is the scriptures, because we have a song about that. The iron rod is the word of God. And Nephi, and that's great. And Nephi uses that. In Jewish apocalyptic literature, an iron rod doesn't usually have to do with the word of God. The Book of Mormon obviously has the right to recontextualize it for its purposes. But in an ancient Jewish context, the iron rod is the iron rod given to the king when he's coronated in Psalm 2. Right? That at the coronation of an Israelite king, they would literally physically reenact this moment where you'd have a clay pot representing the nations of the world, and the iron rod, literally an iron stick, would be given to the king, and the king would smash the thing to bits, the pot to bits, showing that he had power over the nations. On the first archaeological excavation that I ever participated in, I don't remember why they were doing it, but a couple people decided to, it was the dig director's birthday. And so they decided to sing Psalm 2 and smash a pot. I'm not sure, I thought that was a little odd, but it's channeling Psalm 2. Okay, but that's what this author is saying, that you will have the authority, the rod of iron to smash the nations as a clay pot, just like was promised to the kings upon their coronation in ancient Israel. And by the way, that's the same authority that I received from my Father. The enthroned Christ Pantocrator, the Christ Almighty says, with his royal authority. To the one who conquers, I will also give the morning star. The morning star is a really cool image too. I don't know if this one easily fits into kingship and priesthood as easily as the other ones do. But the idea is clear. The morning star, right, is the star that first shows up on the horizon before the sun rises. It's the star that catches the sun. The light shining from the star is the promise that the sun is coming. Right. And so I will give you the morning star. It's a promise of exaltation. It's a promise that these other blessings will be placed upon your head of kingship and priesthood. It's just like the morning star show you can trust that the sun is coming. Well, you will have the morning star to trust that these blessings will be yours. Okay, let's go to Sardis. I think we have 2 or 3 left. Sardis. I guess we have 3 left. Okay. Gosh, we had to fly. 8:25. All right. So Sardis. Chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. Again, you can see the archaeological remains there. Pretty cool site. Artistically, here's probably what Sardis looked like with all of its Greco-Roman institutions. The author says to the house churches in Sardis, I know your works, and you have a name of being alive, but actually you're dead. You've got a pretty good reputation, but I know some stuff about what you guys are doing that you probably shouldn't be doing. If you do not wake up, I'm going to come upon you as a thief in the night. Now, he doesn't go into the details, but Sardis is doing something, the house church there, that the author does not feel is conducive with Christian discipleship. So therefore, wake up, he says. Maybe we can all say that to each other here. It's 9:20. Wake up. We have 10 minutes left. Wake up. Here's why. Because the blessings that are going to be pronounced upon you, he said, are the following. You still have a few persons in Sardis who have not yet soiled their clothes with whatever behavior this author doesn't like. They will still walk with me dressed in white, for they are worthy. If you conquer, you will be clothed like them in white robes. I will not blot out your names from the book of life. I will confess your name before my Father and before his angels. Let anyone who has an ear to hear, let him hear. So what are the images here? Well, number one, a white robe. We are desensitized to white robes because all of our art always depicts Jesus walking around in white robes. No matter how dirty Nazareth might be, not a spot of it gets on Jesus. It's a miracle. Right? The reality is Jesus did not walk around in white robes, and neither did anybody else, except for temple priests serving in the temple precincts. Okay, that was their sacred set-apart clothing, according to the book of Exodus. This author is channeling that imagery onto the heads of faithful people in Sardis. If you are faithful, you will have white robes like a temple priest, ministering in that sacred set-apart space. You will walk with me dressed in the white robes of priests officiating in the Jerusalem temple. If you conquer, you will be clothed like them in white robes, and I will not blot out your name from the book of life. In fact, I will confess your name before God, angels, and so forth. Okay. Again, is Joseph Smith reading the book of Revelation? I think he is. And again, wanting to bring these blessings onto the heads of modern Latter-day Saints as well. Okay. So that's Sardis. Some really cool imagery there. 2 more left. Let's look at Philadelphia. We have 5 minutes, so we could just quickly. Philadelphia, you guys are persecuted by another synagogue of Satan. All right, John, tell us what you really think. Right? This guy really does not like this other Jewish congregation as well. Again, those who say they are Jews but are not. I would love to learn one day what dynamic is leading to that rhetoric, but that's what John is describing. You people in Philadelphia, you house churches in Philadelphia, you have kept my word of patient endurance. So let me pronounce blessings upon your head as well. If you conquer in faithful discipleship in this challenging cultural environment of the Roman world, I will make you a pillar in the temple of my God. You will never go out of it again. In fact, I will write on you the name of my God, the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem that will come down from heaven. We'll talk about that on Friday. And my own new name. Let anyone who has an ear to hear listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches. Okay, this is really an interesting image because the idea at the end of the book of Revelation is that the heavenly temple is one day going to come down to earth and become the New Jerusalem. We're all going to live in it, the faithful and the righteous. So he says, basically, if you guys overcome, you guys are going to be made architectural permanent features of that temple. You're going to be literally the columns at the gate of Solomon's temple. Yakin and Boaz, that's going to be you. You're literally going to be permanent architectural furnishings of that temple. You will never have to go out of the presence of God again. You'll always be there. And you will have the new name written on your forehead. Again, that image comes almost certainly from the clothing of the Jerusalem high priest, who had the headplate with the name of God on his forehead. Well, you're going to have something similar. It's actually going to be God's new name as you're integrated into that heavenly temple that has come down to earth in the new creation at the end of the book. Okay, so hang on to discipleship. That's your destiny. All right, the very last one, Laodicea. Some archaeological remains there. Artistically, here's how we might reconstruct Laodicea. How does the author address this this community. This author used some really interesting image. This author says, you guys are a little lukewarm for me. This author is a go big or go home kind of guy. This author is like not about halfway discipleship. So he says, you're kind of lukewarm. You're neither hot nor cold. So there's something about wealth and complacency in the saints of Laodicea that this author is not approving of, and saying, you guys need to figure this out, right? We're not lukewarm discipleship here. And scholars kind of debate, is there a local image of some kind that lukewarm waters would have connected to? Some have suggested that maybe in Laodicea, the idea is that there's hot springs close by in Hierapolis, and that there's cold drinking water in nearby Colossae. So maybe like you guys are right in the middle. So is it a regional symbol of some kind? Either hot or cold, but you're kind of boring in the middle. Or is this a contrast of heating and chilling wine at a Roman banquet? We don't really know. It's an interesting image, to be sure. What we're interested in for our final 2 minutes, of course, is what are the promises to those who overcome in Laodicea? Well, the author goes and concludes the letter, chapters 2 and 3, concludes it by saying this: well, therefore I counsel you, you lukewarm Laodiceans, I counsel you to buy from me gold refined by fire, so that you might be rich, and white robes to clothe you, and to keep the shame of your nakedness from being seen, and salve to anoint your eyes so that you may see. I reprove and discipline those whom I love. Be earnest, therefore, and repent. Listen, I am standing at the door, knocking. If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come in to you and eat with you, and you with me. We'll have a fellowship meal. Maybe even that messianic banquet of Isaiah 25. To the one who overcomes, I will give a place with me on my throne, just like I overcame and conquered and sat down with my Father on his throne. Let anyone who has an ear to hear, let him hear what the Spirit is saying to the churches. So again, images of white robes to clothe nakedness. That's the image right out of Exodus 28 to describe the priests who wear white robes and an undergarment to cover their nakedness. Most people in the ancient world did not wear underwear. Don't say I never taught you anything. Okay, most people had no underwear at all. It was a tunic that that's it. Okay, except for the priests in the Jerusalem temple, because Exodus 28 says that they would have underwear to cover their nakedness. So they ascended the ramp to offer their sacrifices. And a breeze comes by, people worshiping at the temple don't get more than they're bargaining for. You guys, if you overcome, are going to be like that. You're going to have clothing that covers your nakedness, right? And some kind of anointment so that your eyes may see. We've been using this language the whole time of eyes to see or ears to hear. Well, kind of like a Jewish priest is anointed in his consecrated ministry. So you're going to have some kind of anointing, right? We'll sup together. We'll dine together in a communal meal, maybe even the messianic banquet. And there'll be a throne of kingship waiting for you, just like I overcame and now sit with my Father on his throne. So we are almost out of time, but we have now finished the 7 churches. These are the original intended readers of this book. This book is for them. It's a message of hope for them. It's a message of encouragement for them. The persecutions and the social marginalizations that you're experiencing in Rome and Asia Minor, endure them. These blessings will be yours. And if you do a quick summary of these blessings to those that overcome, we'll notice that they all connect to the original opening promise of the book, that the Sinai covenant will be renewed and refreshed, and that you guys will be the new kingdom of priests with royal authority, a crown of life, throne, authority over the nations, an iron rod to smash the pot like the coronation Psalm 2. But you're also going to be priests ministering in God's temple, having the fruit of the tree of life from the Edenic paradise, the white stone with engraved names, white garments, an architectural feature as a pillar in God's temple. These are the blessings to those that overcome. And again, as a modern side note, is Joseph Smith reading the book of Revelation? He is. Not a coincidence. An enormous amount of these promises to those that overcome end up making their way into the verbiage and the vocabulary of the Latter-day Saint Temple Endowment, because Joseph Smith seems to have the same interest as the author of Revelation. How do we get these things onto the head of the covenant community? So the book of Revelation is a great place to read. Again, we're 3 chapters into the book. Nothing about cataclysm, end times yet. We're not there yet. Right? We're just talking about a revelation of Jesus, blessings to those that overcome, in ways that if we kind of clear the fog of modern misunderstandings of the book of Revelation and just read it for what it is, we are 3 chapters into a very rich scriptural journey and message that in context really, really lights up with meaning, both ancient and with relevant modern application. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and conclude there. Next time, we will read tomorrow night, we will read John's vision of the heavenly throne room, and we'll look at the 7 seals on the scroll, chapters 4 through 11. And Friday, we'll conclude the series with the book, climactic end of the heavenly warfare and the new creation at the end times. Okay, thank you very much. We'll see you tomorrow.